Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Founded by Polish prince, restaurateur and photographer Jan Woroniecki, Kavka is a unique vodka produced using classic methods from the 19th century. The distillery has in fact been making vodka for over 200 years. With pot distillation at its heart, Kavka's flavour is strikingly different to the modern US-dominated definition of vodka, a spirit without taste, flavour, character or colour, and conversely boasts bold and distinctive flavours. Jan predicts a resurgence of vodka is looming after years of gin and whiskey in the spotlight, and joins me for an exciting episode today. Hey team, the episode today is sponsored by our friends at Access Collins. They provide comprehensive table management and end-to-end function management tools that enable you to have complete control over the entire customer journey. If that's something you'd like, please support us by supporting them at bit.ly/hospo sponsor. Jan, thank you very much for joining me on the program today. It's a pleasure to have you on and open up the world of vodka as well. And you're of Polish descent, but there is debate between the Russians and the Poles between where vodka comes from as well. I want to clear up that argument with you today as well. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Well, a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Jan, as you know, the first question that I like to ask on the program is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. I'd love to know what you've brought to the show today.
Well, I don't know if I've got a particularly strange hospitality story. The restaurant business is always bizarre, and you always encounter very strange people doing very strange things after they've had a few too many drinks, as you're aware. I mean, without going into the grosser elements of people's behavior, I suppose one of the most bizarre just incidents that springs to mind was a woman who came into one of my restaurants once, and she was slim and kind of elegantly dressed. And when she walked out in the evening, she looked very, very pregnant. I just accosted her and found out she'd been smuggling a champagne cooler out under her dress, and it was too obvious, and she got caught. I'm afraid there's nothing more salacious than that, because otherwise I'll get into trouble.
That's okay. You don't have to share anything that will get you into trouble. But even that story in itself, I can imagine that seeing that event, if it was concealed well, would be something to think twice before you did accost her, as you described.
Well, yes. I mean, I was just fairly sure that she hadn't come in as 8 months pregnant.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that story, Jan. The second question I normally ask on the program is around why you do what you do. So I'd love to know what really inspires you, what really motivates you to get up in the morning and work on a vodka brand. And Kavka has done really well in the UK, and you're expanding into Australia, and I want to open that up a bit more. But tell me a bit more about what actually inspires you to run this business.
Well, as I've been saying, I've been in the restaurant business for many, many years, and most of the restaurants were Eastern European in style. And I had tasted every vodka known to man over the years. I've talked to myself over the years about doing my own vodka brand, but it has never seemed to be a good opportunity because the big brands were very dominant, splashing the cash around, and it was always very difficult for a smaller brand to get a foothold. But it was with the gin revolution kind of in the UK over the past 5 or so years that the openings for small artisanal personal brands seemed to open up. And at the same time, the big vodka brands were seen to be slightly mendacious in the way they did their marketing. They were competing over a very small point of difference and going on about how many times this has been distilled and what it's filtered through and other issues that are really, to my mind, are slightly irrelevant. So I thought it was a good time to try and start my own vodka brand. I did some research and realized that back in the day, back in the 19th century, many distilleries would produce vodka in Poland and accentuated the character and accentuated the taste and tried to make a real point of difference, because it was before the times of homogeneity and communist control and centralization. And also before times in the American legal definition of vodka of being a odorless, tasteless, characterless, colorless liquid, which thankfully they've just changed, by the way, which kind of brought all the vodkas down to a common denominator. I kind of pursued this and came up with a very good production method from the 19th century and worked with a fantastic master distiller in Poland called Woroniecki. And we came up with this blend that I thought bridges the gap between a good plain vodka, but something with extra character and flavor, but is still versatile enough to be drunk in many ways.
Can you tell us about when this was as well? Because it's not an old brand. This, as you said, the gin revolution or most recent gin revolution, or sort of maybe we can call it a second gin craze in a way. In the last 4 years, that has occurred. But when did you start making this vodka?
We're a relatively new brand, and I always struggle to remember when we launched because of the pandemic has made us all slightly amnesia about these dates. But we launched about 2.5, 3 years ago. We were doing the classic thing of going into London on trade and getting into good bars and restaurants and kind of gaining a reputation that way. Unfortunately, we hadn't really attacked retail in the UK, and then the pandemic came. So obviously the on-trade disappeared overnight, and we were frantically trying to get some online and retail business going. Strangely, during that period, our export business started kind of taking off. And the biggest side of this was Australia. So we have been taken on by Pinnacle, and we are in BWS and Dan Murphy stores, 1,000 across the country. And we launched in Australia in kind of end of July, August.
What is it about the Australian market that has really interested you and the business? I mean, I'm sure there's more to it than demand, but what's really driving that demand is what I'm asking.
I wonder. I think it's mostly the same driving forces throughout the rest of the world. And I think it's partly to do with pandemic. And I think the pandemic has given people opportunity to look at their shelves, whether it be in bars, restaurants, or shops and retail, and say, do we want all this range? Do we want all these hundreds of different types of the same product, but really don't have much point of difference? And there are any different names that we've heard about. We're certainly noticing this in the on-trade in the UK, that a lot of bar managers are getting rid of a lot of their kind of old stuff that they've had hanging around on shelves for years and wanting to focus on a smaller but better variety of each particular range. And so Kavka is ideal for that because it has a point of difference. I mean, it looks great. The packaging is fabulous. It stands out. But there is a real point of difference there. And so that they can buy into that and have it as one of the small numbers on the shelf. And I think that most really philosophy or kind of ethos is the same in the retail sector, whether it be Australia or anywhere else.
So with my next question, looking more back at that retail space, and I don't necessarily mean retail from a distribution perspective, more about retail from a hospitality perspective, because you've been in the game for a long time, I'd like to know what you actually would define hospitality by.
I have always prided myself or thought that I was a customer that happened to open a restaurant. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I never had any formal training. I didn't go up the ladder in any institutions. I came straight in from the outside and started a restaurant because I was in a position, as I mentioned before, I used to be a photographer, and I had an opportunity to open a restaurant in London, and I thought I could do it in my spare time. I was working 3 or 4 days a week doing photography, and I thought, okay, I've got plenty of time. So the restaurant business was far too much fun, and the photography kind of went by the wayside eventually. So I've always thought that hospitality actually means what it says. It's you need to look at all aspects of the restaurant business from the customer's perspective, and not, as often happens in many places, from the perspective of the chefs or the managers or whoever. There is often a big divide between those two perspectives, and I have to haul up my managers over the years in various restaurants. And this is not run for your convenience, it's run for the convenience of the customers. And so there always has to be a spirit of generosity. There has to be a warmth of welcome. There has to be a buzz of excitement. Because one must remember that people come out to eat in restaurants for many, many reasons, and often the least of which is to get food.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How do you then create that buzz of excitement, as you described there, and create that warmth and that welcoming nature about a space?
My key thing is always lighting. And I think lighting is the most important element within a restaurant, because even if people don't notice it consciously, subconsciously, if the lighting's not right, they're ill at ease. And so you have to make the people physically comfortable, right down to the core before they can begin to enjoy themselves. So very important part of the ambiance is the lighting. And then it is, as they say, this kind of willingness to engage with the customer, please them, make them happy, and get them totally relaxed. You can't have them hanging around at the table before they get something to drink or something at least to nibble at. It has to be there quickly so that then they can drop their shoulders and start to enjoy their evening. So the whole process of formal or semi-formal of waiting for people to get a menu or this or that, is irritating. I think you need to get going quickly and get them enjoying themselves and get a vodka martini down their throats quite quickly to help with the process.
Very good. That mentality behind it is, as you described, a bit contrary to the traditional view in a lot of ways, but has changed a lot in recent years to be more about that. And dining has become a lot more relaxed in a lot of ways, even the more formal end of the dining scene. How have you seen things change and evolve over your time in the industry?
I think it has changed enormously. I opened my first restaurant in 1989. I suppose the industry had relaxed some by then, but it was still very hit and miss. But the UK restaurant business has developed enormously, and with the new kind of younger, hipper chefs, if one can put it that way, I think there's some very, very good food to be had in the UK, and the consistency and quality is generally much better. And the customers themselves are becoming much more educated and much more sophisticated in the way they approach food. When I opened my first restaurant back in 89, people didn't know about Eastern European food. There was a fairly kind of stereotyped view of it, but they'd learned over the years to appreciate the kind of finer points of it. They didn't know how to drink vodka. That was sure back in the day. And this was a big excitement in London in the late 80s of drinking shots of plain or flavored vodkas. And people get very overexcited and sometimes not realize they're always 2 or 3 drinks behind. And so there were casualties from those days. The restaurant world is a totally different place to what it was 30 years ago. Unfortunately, with current Brexit and COVID implications, that we are slightly going backwards because there's no staff to be had whatsoever in the UK, in London. Restaurants are really suffering from that. And everybody's having to close a few shifts a week just to keep the existing kitchen staff on their feet. So we're entering a rather difficult time for it.
So what is it that you're learning about or exploring at the moment then? So you mentioned there's obviously been a long period of time that between opening your first restaurant in 1989 there to today, there's a number of years and a number of things that have changed in the industry. But what are you learning about now? And you mentioned the restrictions and hurdles that you have to overcome as a result of Brexit and COVID, more obviously. What is it that you're looking to push things forward now?
The mood after the kind of lockdowns and COVID is everybody was very, very happy to come back into a restaurant, and they were very overexcited, and we've been very, very busy since the close of lockdown. I suppose what we've got to do is just consolidate on that. We have to learn how to be cleverer in the way we run the business, because there is massive wage inflation, supply chains are getting stretched, costs are going up. So it is going to be a second kind of existential hurdle for the hospitality business. Those who came through the lockdowns and have reopened have now got to find a way of making the costs work, because certainly pre-COVID, it was all pretty static in the way that, you could judge your wage costs and the food costs and booze costs were all fairly consistent. Now everything's in flux. So I think that's the challenge for the next 6 months to a year, is navigating your way through those rising prices and inflation.
And then looking to Kavka and that brand and away from the retail end of hospitality, what are some of the things that you're looking at as you're developing that brand?
We're hopeful that there is a kind of growing shift or a growing acceptance in many markets that vodka is an honorable spirit. It has got devalued so badly over the years, mostly the fault of the vodka producers themselves and the way they approach the market, and were rather cynical and greedy. And I think that we've got to work at persuading people that vodka has integrity, has quality, has provenance, has points of difference. There's a growing band of smaller producers. Some of them are just making vodka as a kind of offshoot to their gin brands. I mean, that's not going to really work in the long run, and they're just trying to kind of increase volumes. But there are some honorable exceptions who make very good vodka. Now, obviously, coming from Poland, which is the heartland of vodka, and as you alluded to before, there's always a debate as to whether the Poles or the Russians first created vodka. To be diplomatic, I'd say we pretty much did at the same time, but of course, Polish vodka is better. But there is a very good long heritage and history of creating vodka, and that it is not just a matter of creating a tasteless white spirit in an industrial column still. There is a degree of finesse expertise to this. You notice that if you drink some cheap brand as against my brand or other good brands, there is a real point of difference. I think our job at the moment is to say, yes, you can, because, I mean, Kavka, as with many other brands, it's a premium product. I mean, it's premium sales price, so it's not the cheapest on the market by any stretch. But what we have to say to people is that it's worth spending that little bit of extra money because the quality you get from that is worthwhile.
So everything that I've seen too, and speaking with a lot of businesses, we're over 150 episodes into the show now, over 4.5 years or so. I've seen a lot of things too, and in those years, and I really do think that craft vodka is going to be another big movement. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on that too, and I'm waiting for it to really come through with a lot of smaller players, because as you said, people are making vodka to supplement their cash flow for gin or for whiskey, or mostly for gin that I've seen. But it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that as well. I'd like to actually ask you a bit more about the product itself and different craft vodkas and what brands are doing to stand out. You don't have to necessarily name brands that would be competitors of yours, but what is it that vodka is doing with its process to actually stand out from another brand, given that it has been commoditized and homogenized in a lot of ways?
With Kavka, obviously starting from my own brand, we start from a base of blending 50-50 blend of very good rye and wheat spirits. Then we add small quantities of pot stilled spirits, fruit spirits. So a bit of plum, a bit of apple. And we have these fruit spirits made for us in there's an amazing small market town in east of Poland called Sandomierz, which is kind of ancient market town, very beautiful. And it's right in the middle of the fruit growing area of Poland. And we use these kind of old varietals of plums and apples that aren't really commercially saleable but they produce an incredible intensity of flavor. And the eau de vies that we produce just in a pot still method are fabulous. And when we add about 1% of volume of these fruit spirits to the base grain spirit, and then we rest it for a while, for at least 3 months, and let it settle. And the flavor profile is very subtle, but it is noticeable. So I like drinking Kavka warm, and there's not many vodkas you can say that about. You don't get any of the alcohol fumes. You don't get that harsh hit. There is a softness and a smoothness and a complexity to the taste that is very rare. So, as I said, I wanted to create a vodka that was distinctive, but was versatile enough to be drunk as a shot with a mixer, or it does indeed make a very fabulous martini because the flavor profile changes in the drink. So the colder the martini is, the apple notes come out more, it's crisper. And as the drink warms up, then the plum tones come out and it's got a sweeter, smoother ending. Other vodka brands that I think are taking very interesting routes to this. I mean, there's an old tradition in Poland called okowito, which is a spirit distilled from honey. And so there's some very good brands that are producing kind of okowito vodka, which is a honey-based spirit. But again, it has a complexity and it's very interesting.
Jan, I'd like to know how you're dealing with competitors in your space. And I mean, a lot of businesses do say, particularly in the craft world, they talk about not really having competitors because their product stands out. But ultimately, everyone's got a budget. Like every venue's got a budget, or the customer has an ability to spend money on whoever they are going to choose. And you have to stand out to them in the space that you're in. So I'd love to know how you're standing out next to those competitors.
Well, I suppose, as you say, we're all struggling over a small territory of opportunity. We, like many other small brands, I mean, we're self-financed, so there's not much money to throw around. We have to be clever with the marketing. We have to be clever with how we discount and this, that, and the other. And I suppose our particular way through is to persuade people that this is worth trying because it is different. And I think to some extent, we are one of the first kids on the block that has a kind of authentic story. As you know, the booze business is full of smoke and mirrors. Drilling down to the absolute truth in a lot of marketing claims is quite tricky. But I am confident that our story is pretty much mostly true. And there's no mendacity there. So I'm confident to go in and make the claims and say that what we do and how we do it is true, we're open, it is authentic. There is a real provenance, there's a history, there's a method to this that dates back a couple of hundred years at least, but is modern upgrading of the sector and taking it forward into the future. So far it works quite well. I mean, there are a lot of bars and a lot of shops, especially in the UK, is still a little bit focused on other brands, other sectors, whether it be gin or tequila and slightly discount vodka, but that is changing. So we just have to keep on plugging away.
Mm. When you're looking at other brands, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in spirits, it could be adjacent industries or completely different ones. Who are you looking to for models and systems and processes for you to use in your businesses?
On the production side, we don't have the level of complexity that whiskey producers have, and I would never compare our product to a fine single malt. I think the way we're approaching it is coming into a little bit of their territory, or even a bit more cognac-y or armagnac, because we are focusing on these fruit spirits. We're focusing on the locality. One could almost say the terroir, but it would be very pretentious in a vodka to say that. But we are trying to accentuate the fruit spirits that we make for ourselves, and that they do vary. So from year to year, because of the different fruits and different harvests and what have you, there is a variation. So we have to play with that variation. We say to customers, if they've noticed actually for doing different batches, say, well, this is it. We're not calling ourselves a batch vodka, but there will be variation. We cannot guarantee this absolute 100% consistency of taste. It's always going to be fabulous, but it's not going to be the same. So we're happy to run with those variations and not try and create a kind of uniformity.
That's the magic of craft often as well. But it is contrary to the current perspective on what vodka is, but rather looking at what vodka can be, which I think is interesting to hear from you as well. So thank you for sharing those insights. I'd like to know who you're looking to. So other than that, they're on models, systems, processes. Do you have some individuals that you ask for support from or guidance from in the development of your businesses?
We've kind of really just done it by ourselves, muddling along. And as always, it's the way I did the restaurant business. You kind of think as a arrogant amateur, you know better. You soon learn you don't, and you make some mistakes. I've spoken to a few people, and strangely enough, there's a very good tequila brand, Ocho. I don't know, it got to the States, which was actually started up by a fellow restaurateur in London who had a Mexican restaurant called Cafe Pacifico in Covent Garden. And so I got to know him, and they were successful. They were about 10 years ahead of us, and they just sold out for a very healthy amount of money, I think, recently. But that kind of organic process of engaging people, the way the owner, Tom Estes, was very charismatic in the way he went about selling his brand. But it was always very passionate. It was very personal. It was about his belief in what he was doing. And I think that's a big lesson, that you can't be cynical or offhand about these things. You have to be personally engaged. And it's the same as in the restaurant business. You have to be personally engaged. As an owner, I'm there interacting with the customers, and I will be clearing glasses and plates off the table if it's required. So people have to see that you've got that horrible expression, sweat in the game or whatever it is.
It's actually a very honest answer and I appreciate that honesty with that view that you have done a lot of things yourself. And you said you're not looking to many other people, or maybe there are some models and businesses out there that you're looking to model growth, but not some individuals. And I think that, I appreciated the honesty with your answer there as well. In that, I'm sure that you are encountering some, and I mean, not just because of the fact that you are making things up in a lot of ways as you go, and there's nothing wrong with that with startup businesses as well, and you've done well in the restaurant world with that. But I'm sure you're hitting some obstacles or some challenges that you're working through. I'd like to know where you're getting the most friction at the moment that you're working through at the moment.
I suppose because we're quite a young brand, we haven't really had time or the kind of distance from it to really decide who and what we are. And there's many stories that one tells about Kavka, and I kind of, rabbit on about it. But I suppose getting the feedback from kind of distributors and wholesalers and actually the end, retailers, they want a more precise and easy to understand version of what Kavka is. That what we're working through at the moment is to try and get the story out there and put it precisely. And it turns out to be quite a tricky thing because it was organic in its growth, Kavka. I never set out to create a particular brand with a particular name, but everything just kind of happened as a result of other things. And we arrived where we are, and thankfully in a reasonably good position. So at the moment, we're going through this kind of rather ghastly marketing exercise, which I don't desperately enjoy, but I suppose it is necessary, and engaging marketing experts to guide me on that path.
It certainly sounds like from what you've described there that it is a matter of just clarifying that message, and I'm sure you're working with some great people to do that. As we get to the end of the episode, Jan, I've only got one more question just before the final one. So this is the penultimate question of the episode. I'd love to know, ultimately, where would you like to be? So what does success look like for you, for the business? How do you define that? You said there that, you are making a lot of things up as you go along and the business is still young, and I'm sure you're determining what these metrics really look like to you with the business. But I'd like to know, just on a more abstract level then, what does success look like to you?
Success for Kavka would be to get it around the world and recognized as a good brand and with a degree of worldwide recognition. Partly, and it's a very selfish reason, I would love to travel the world a lot more. And if I can go to different countries to promote Kavka, then that would be an ideal situation for me. So it's the kind of the financial success, but also it's my lifestyle. I'd like to pursue a bit more of a globe-trotting life from now on. And as a degree of success, I think one's never satisfied with success. One gets restless if you think you've been successful in something, you will kind of want to then move on and do something else. So I find that slightly dangerous at the moment. I've been distracted by too many things over the years and lost focus on what particular business I was doing at the time. So I'd like to keep it simple and not get bored and keep the eye on the prize, as it were.
Fantastic. Well, Jan, I've just got one last question for you today, and that's, who would you like to hear on the show?
Going back to the restaurant business as opposed to the vodka business, the most influential character in the British restaurant scene of the past 30, 40 years is Fergus Henderson of St. John's. And he's got a bit more notoriety recently, but his influence in the whole British restaurant scene, I think, is very underrated. I mean, unknown. He's very kind of low key, but he has sent legions of young chefs out into the world who have taken on his ethos of simplicity, of going back to basics, but done in a really good, honest way. So if there is a hero to be had in the restaurant world, far more than any Gordon Ramsay or Marco Pierre White or even Pierre Kaufman or whoever, I would say Fergus Henderson is the most influential man in British cuisine.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the program today, Jan. It's been a pleasure having you on, hearing about your experiences in business, in the restaurant world, now with Kavka, and distributing into Australia, as we discussed, is now what you're doing as well. And fingers crossed for you to be able to expand internationally and live that globe-trotting lifestyle that you're aiming for.
Well, absolutely. And my first stop will be Australia, of course, because can't wait when you open your borders again.
Yes, please. Looking forward to having you. So thank you again, Jan, and glad to connect and looking forward to watching you grow.
Thank you, and a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much.
This program is hosted by James Henderson. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.